why are we making these axes? So I asked Greg why he would want us to make 100 axes. Why would you want 3 blacksmiths from Somerset to hand forge 100 axes at no small expense? Instead, when you could go to a manufacturer or a big factory, or get them machine made, or you can get them imported from overseas or whatever. And he said it was about kind of reflecting the authenticity, the craftsmanship in what they do at Ooni. Although it is in inverted commas, a kind of a machine-made product, it's been designed with passion and thought, and the food that is cooked in them is it's full of spirit and character, and they wanted to reflect that side of their business in a handmade product. So something that's kind of almost taking their brand back to its original roots. The first ovens were handmade. When you get to a certain number of pieces that you make, you have to look at different ways of making it, but the core roots of what they do are still very similar to the core roots of what we do. It's about things that are made by people, that are made for people, and the objects that we make here aren't necessarily perfect, but they're full of life and full of character, and they wanted to have that sort of reflection, that relationship between their ovens and the things that people are using to chop the wood to feed the ovens. At the very beginning of the project, we spent 4 days or a week, something along those lines, just retooling, slightly rejigging the workshop a little bit so that we could have more space, more capability to punch 50 blocks at a time. Normally we would do half a dozen or a dozen, and even cutting 100 blanks to start with. All these different little aspects that you start to build in, and we made different tooling. We made separate drifts for forging the eye out of harder steel so they'd be more resistant. So the drift at the beginning of the project is the same as it is at the end. And I think one other difference that's happened in the workshop throughout the process is that Joe has taken on a lot more of the forging. So percentage wise, I think the first batch we were 50-50, the next batch we were probably 40-60, the next batch we were 70-30, because I'm getting busier and busier and more time off the workshop. Joe's skill is increasing as he makes more of the same axe. He can make them faster and more efficiently and with less supervision, or no supervision now, and now he makes them better than I do. So that's been an interesting transition kind of over the last 6 months. I think it's been going on for, we've actually only been making them for 4 months, but there was a couple of months worth of going back and forth and sampling and getting the handles right and getting the sheaths right, setting up the sheath prototypes so they're all laser cut now. So all these different little kind of aspects have come together. And it's really interesting to see the difference between number 1 and number 100. They're the same, but they're also really different. And that kind of sums the whole project up in a way. And I think that's what Greg wanted us to do, is to make something that is kind of reflects the style of their ovens, which are obviously laser cut and put together, and they're all the same. But each oven, after it's been used, has its kind of own individual character. And hopefully we've sort of translated that into the axes and how they look and how they work.
The stage that gives life to the axe, if you like, is the heat treating. Heat treating, depending on the type of steel you're using, can be very complicated or very simple. The type of steel we're using means that the heat treatment is relatively simple, so there aren't that many stages to it. The first thing we will do is heat all the axes up in an electric kiln and then let them cool down over a very long period of time. Cool down from 820 degrees to about 150 degrees over a time period of 9 or 10 hours. That's going to allow the steel to relax, relieve any stresses from forging, and make the steel very soft and just relieve any tension within the steel. The next process is hardening. So we'll take the axes up to their critical temperature and we will quench them in oil. The problem with hardening something is that it becomes very brittle. So the final stage of heat treatment is the tempering, where we draw back that hardness and increase the toughness.
Here in the workshop, when we make our own design of axes, we will make the handles here. Joe will make the handles. We use ash, always use ash. We don't use hickory, which has become quite common these days. But with this particular project, we're sending the heads off, fully sharpened, to Sam Morris at the Axe and Edge Tool Company. And they're all individually hand carved and fitted to each axe. We have designed a slightly faceted handle, partly because it fits really nicely with the design, and secondly because it gives a really good, nice firm grip in your hand. The whole thing with making axes is, as much as technically it's a great challenge, and this project in itself is an amazing challenge because there were so many, and you've got a lovely design aspect and you've got the physical aspect of making something. At the end, an axe is a tool that needs to be used. If it's just hung on the wall, it's just a piece of metal with a wooden handle and it's a beautiful object. But the real joy, I think, certainly for us here, is seeing that the tools we make being used by someone.
I've always loved cooking outside over fire, whether it's in a wood oven or over a grill. But the wood oven, I think, has always had a particular appeal. You know, it's sort of rooted in tradition. I guess every sort of house in every village would have had a wood oven of sorts that they'd be very familiar with, and cooking on it would be a sort of daily routine. We've sort of fallen out of favour with that now, but there's still that draw to light a fire and cook something in an oven like that. What Ooni seem to have done is sort of taken the traditional wood oven and brought it into the sort of 21st century. So now it's accessible to nearly everyone, whether you've got just a tiny backyard or a big garden. You can have a wood oven and you can cook amazing things in it. It's great to see something so ancient being used on a daily basis by all sorts of different people. So cooking over fire, it has those traditional roots. It's steeped in history and craftsmanship, which is why it's so nice to have tools that hark back to that time as well. So when I'm splitting the wood, I'm using an axe that has been forged by hand. This is a real piece of history. The techniques that have been used to make it, the way it looks, the way it feels, it's a lovely traditional tool, and to use it hand in hand with an oven that, albeit is fairly modern, the approach is very much traditional. My approach to cookery is really very simple. I'm inspired by the seasons, by the landscape around me, and by the farmers and growers and producers that live and work in the area, or even craftsmen. It's very important for me to support these people in what they're doing and showcase, what they do so well too. So whether it's some fantastic mushrooms that I put on the pizza, or whether it's a beautifully made axe, I've always been right behind people who are doing things to the best of their abilities in a sort of ethical and sustainable way. As far as I know, it's designed for pizza, but you do not have to stop there, in my opinion. You can literally do all sorts in it. As long as you can fit it in there, you can roast it. If you get the heat right, you get some onions caramelizing in there, you get some steaks cooking in there on a high heat. There's no reason why you couldn't roast some fish in there, some fresh lobsters, just split, garlic butter, straight under, those flames licking across the roof. It's almost like a grill and an oven when you get the temperature right, which isn't hard. What's good about this particular model is that you can convert it to a gas burning oven, which is fantastic, particularly if you're maybe in a situation where you haven't got access to wood, or burning wood in that area isn't so cool. But my preference is always to get it going with wood, and I think it excels like that. As long as you're working with good dry wood, it's very, very, very easy to get going. We went for a sort of winter pizza, so lovely slow cooked onions, just caramelised in the Ooni oven there. Some kale from the garden. There's a chap down the road who's growing these beautiful mushrooms, cultivating all sorts of different varieties, but today we had some king oyster mushrooms, which are very sort of sculpted, regal looking fungus, and meaty to eat. So we sliced these lovely mushrooms and top the onions and kale with the mushrooms, and then a couple of different cheeses. A lovely fresh soft goat's cheese went on, as well as a local mature cheddar. Olive oil, salt, pepper, a few herbs from the garden, thyme, rosemary, and that's it really. Comes together quite quickly. Pizza's probably one of my favourite foods. I know that sounds terrible, but it's true. A good pizza can sort of tick all the boxes really.